Retire and disappear, Dad. You're an embarrassment at the office. That's what my son said to me, standing in the doorway of my own corner office, in front of two employees who happened to be walking past with the delivery cart. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up the phone on my desk, called my broker, and by 4 o'clock that same afternoon, I had sold every share I owned in the company we built together. My son's face went gray when the board called an emergency meeting the following morning. Before I go any further, thank you for being here with me tonight. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, wherever you happen to be sitting right now. A small note before we start. This story weaves in some fictional elements for the sake of the telling. The names in the town aren't real, but everything underneath them happened close enough to true that I think it's worth telling. My name is Walter Kessler. I am 70 years old. I founded a regional logistics and freight brokerage company, Kessler Transport Solutions, in 1979, out of a rented office above a hardware store, and built it, over 4 decades, into a company with 62 employees and contracts spanning 11 states. I want to tell you about the afternoon my son told me to retire and disappear, and about exactly what he learned, within 24 hours, about the difference between running a company and owning one. I need you to understand something before this story really gets going. This is not a tale about a bitter old man clinging to power he should have let go of years ago. I am not bitter. I have learned, over a good many years now, that bitterness is what happens when a man swallows an insult and lets it sit and rot in his chest instead of naming it plainly. What I felt that afternoon in my own office doorway was not bitterness. It was clarity, the specific, cold clarity of a man finally understanding exactly how his own son had come to see him. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what happened in that doorway without understanding what I built before my son ever had a hand in it. I started Kessler Transport Solutions in 1979 with a single rented desk, a rotary phone, and a hand-drawn map of shipping routes I'd taught myself to read while working as a dispatcher for another company for 6 years prior. I married my wife, Carol, that same year, and she kept the books at our kitchen table most evenings for the first decade of the business, the same way plenty of small business wives did in those years. Our son, Gregory, was born in 1981. And I want to tell you honestly that I spent most of his childhood working 6 days a week, building something I hoped, someday, he would want to be part of. There is a story from those early years I want to tell you, because I think it explains something about the man I was long before any of this happened. In 1983, 4 years into the business, we nearly lost our largest client to a competitor offering a lower rate. And I spent 3 months personally driving routes myself, alongside our small crew, to prove our reliability firsthand rather than simply promising it on paper. Carol kept the books at our kitchen table those same 3 months, some nights until midnight, and I remember her telling me once, tired but resolute, that we hadn't built anything yet worth losing sleep over giving up on now. We kept that client for another 31 years. I tell you this because I want you to understand that the values underneath everything that happened later with Gregory were not new values I discovered out of hurt feelings in an office doorway. They were the same values Carol and I had lived by from the very first hard year of the business, that a thing built honestly deserves to be defended honestly, and that giving up on it, even under pressure, was never simply an option we allowed ourselves. The company grew slowly and honestly across 4 decades. By 1995 we had 14 employees and contracts across 3 states. By 2010 we had grown to 40 employees and 11 state contracts, and by the time Gregory turned 38 in 2019, Kessler Transport Solutions had 62 employees and a reputation, across the entire regional freight industry, for reliability that companies twice our size could not consistently match. I am telling you all of this because you need to understand exactly what kind of foundation I was standing on the day my son told me I was an embarrassment. I did not arrive in that doorway a helpless, fading man with nothing behind him. I arrived there as a man who had built something real, over 40 years, with his own 2 hands and his wife's steady bookkeeping beside him, and who had never once, not for a single day of it, handed full ownership of that company to anyone else. Gregory joined the business in 2010, at 29, after 7 years working operations for a national carrier, a job he'd taken straight out of college partly, I believe now, out of a young man's need to prove he could succeed somewhere that wasn't simply handed to him by his father. I gave him increasing responsibility over the following decade, eventually naming him company president in 2018, while I remained chairman and majority shareholder, a structure Gregory and I had discussed and agreed to together, in what I believed, at the time, was a genuine partnership built on mutual respect. What I did not do, and this matters enormously to everything that follows, was ever transfer majority ownership of the company to him. I retained 58% of the shares, Gregory held 30%, and the remaining 12% was distributed among 3 long-tenured senior managers as part of a retention incentive program we'd established together in 2016. I want to explain why I structured it this way, because I think the reasoning matters. It was not distrust, not at first. It was simply prudent, standard succession planning, the kind any competent business attorney recommends, giving Gregory genuine, substantial authority and a genuine stake in the company's success, while ensuring that final control remained with the person who had built the thing from nothing and who still bore the ultimate financial and legal responsibility for it. Over the following years, though, I began to notice a shift in how Gregory spoke about the company, and about me, in ways that started to concern me slowly, the way a rattle in an engine starts quiet and gets steadily louder over months before you finally admit to yourself that something needs looking at. He began, in board meetings, referring to decisions as his calls, even when they touched on matters that required my sign-off as chairman. He began, at industry conferences, introducing himself simply as the owner of Kessler Transport Solutions, without qualification, without ever mentioning that his father, the actual majority shareholder, was very much alive and very much still involved. I let this go for longer than I should have, telling myself it was simply the confident language of a man growing into a leadership role. I want to tell you about one specific incident from the spring of 2021, because it shows how the pattern had already begun accumulating well before that Thursday afternoon. At a regional logistics summit, an event I had attended for over 2 decades, Gregory was asked to speak on a panel about the future of freight brokerage, and in his opening remarks, he described founding Kessler Transport Solutions in 2010, the year he'd actually joined a company already 31 years old. I was in the audience. I said nothing at the time, telling myself it was simply an innocent slip of phrasing rather than a genuine belief taking root. I did not let it go entirely, though. Quietly, in the fall of 2022, I met with our longtime corporate attorney, a sharp, careful woman named Diane Forsyth, and asked her to review our shareholder agreement and make certain that my majority control remained exactly as clean and exactly as protected as it had always been on paper. Diane, I said to her that October afternoon, I don't think anything's gone wrong yet. I just want to make sure that if something ever did go wrong, the structure already protects the company, and protects me, the way it's supposed to. Diane had reviewed the existing documents carefully and told me, after 2 weeks, that our agreement was sound, but recommended one addition, a clause specifying that any attempt by a minority shareholder, including an officer or family member, to publicly misrepresent the ownership structure of the company, or to unilaterally attempt to force the removal or marginalization of the majority shareholder from active company involvement, would trigger an automatic review of that individual's continued employment and board standing at the majority shareholder's discretion. I signed that amendment in November of 2022, nearly 2 years before the afternoon in my office doorway that I'm about to tell you about. I did not tell Gregory about it. I told Carol, because Carol deserved to know, and I hoped, genuinely, that the amendment would simply sit quietly in a drawer for the rest of my working life, never once needed. I need to tell you about the afternoon itself now, because the confrontation didn't come out of nowhere, and I think the setup matters as much as the moment itself. I had continued coming into the office 3 days a week even after naming Gregory president, not to interfere in daily operations, but because I still enjoyed the work, still enjoyed walking the floor and talking with drivers and dispatchers I'd known for 20 years, still felt, at 70, entirely capable of contributing meaningfully to a company that carried my own name. That particular Thursday afternoon, I was in my office reviewing a contract renewal with our largest client, a conversation Gregory had asked me to weigh in on precisely because the client's owner, an old-fashioned man in his own right, had specifically requested to speak with me directly, given our 20-year relationship. Gregory came to my doorway partway through this call, and I noticed, though I didn't think much of it at the time, that his jaw was already set in a particular way I'd learned over the years to recognize as displeasure building towards something. I finished the call, and Gregory stepped fully into my office, closing the door partway, though not all the way, which meant that Marcus and Ellen, 2 of our dispatch coordinators, happened to be passing by with a delivery cart at exactly the moment his voice rose enough to carry into the hallway. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk, and I need you to actually hear me this time." I told him I was listening. "You can't keep doing this," he said. "Taking client calls without looping me in first, wandering the floor talking to drivers like you're still running day-to-day operations, showing up 3 days a week like this is still 2005. I'm the president of this company. I have people asking me why my 70-year-old father is still making unilateral decisions on major accounts." I told him, calmly, that the client had specifically requested me, and that I hadn't made any unilateral decision, simply had the conversation he'd asked me to have. Gregory's jaw tightened further, and something in the set of his shoulders told me this conversation had been building for a long while before that afternoon. "That's not the point, Dad," he said, his voice rising now, carrying clearly through the partially open door. "The point is you need to actually retire. Really retire. Not this half-in, half-out thing you've been doing for 6 years. You're 70 years old. You're an embarrassment at the office, Dad. People are starting to talk. Just retire and disappear. Let me actually run this company the way it needs to be run without you hovering over every decision like you don't trust me." The office did not go silent, exactly, the way these confrontations sometimes do in the stories you hear. But I saw Marcus and Ellen, out in the hallway, both suddenly very interested in the wheels of their delivery cart, the particular studied concentration of people pretending very hard not to have overheard something they very much overheard. I looked at my son for a long moment. 38 years old, standing in the doorway of the office I had built from a rented desk above a hardware store, telling me, in front of 2 employees I had personally hired 15 years earlier, that I was an embarrassment, that I should retire and disappear. "I hear you, Gregory," I said. "I appreciate the clarity." Something in my tone must have registered as wrong to him, because his eyes narrowed slightly, uncertain, the particular uncertainty of a person who has just said something he expected to feel like a victory, and is suddenly unsure why it doesn't. But he said nothing further. He turned and walked back toward his own office, and I sat alone at my desk for a long moment, the door still partway open, and I thought, with a specific, cold clarity, about exactly what I owned, and exactly what that ownership actually meant. I need to stop here for a moment, because what I did next is the part one think matters most. If you're still with me, drop the number 58 in the comments. That's the percentage of shares I still held, so I know you're still sitting with me through this. Fair warning, the story from here weaves in a few more fictional elements to bring the truth of it to life more clearly. If that's not the kind of telling you're looking for, this is a fine place to step away, with my full respect. For those staying, let's keep going. I picked up my phone and called my broker, a man named Philip Ashworth who had managed my personal investment accounts for nearly 15 years, though I want to be clear that what I was calling about that afternoon was not a personal stock portfolio, but something considerably more significant. Philip, I said, I want to initiate the sale process on my majority stake in Kessler Transport Solutions. I want you to reach out to Meridian Logistics Group today. I'd had a standing, informal conversation with Meridian's acquisitions team for nearly 2 years, ever since they'd first approached me at an industry conference expressing interest in acquiring a controlling stake in a well-run regional freight company, precisely the kind of company Kessler Transport Solutions had become. I had always declined to move forward seriously, out of loyalty to what Gregory and I had built together. That afternoon, sitting alone in my office with the memory of my son's voice still ringing in the hallway, I decided the loyalty needed to run in both directions to mean anything at all. I called Diane Forsyth next, and told her what I intended to do. Walter, she said, are you certain? This is a significant, permanent step. I told her I was entirely certain, and asked her to prepare the necessary documentation for a controlling stake sale, invoking, if needed, the very amendment we'd quietly drafted 2 years earlier. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, I had signed a preliminary letter of intent with Meridian Logistics Group for the sale of my 58% controlling stake in Kessler Transport Solutions, at a valuation Philip and Diane both confirmed was genuinely favorable, reflecting the company's strong 4-decade track record. I did not sell out of spite. I want to be honest about that. I sold because I understood, sitting in that office after Gregory walked away, that a son who believed his father was merely an embarrassment standing in the way of his own ambitions had already, in every way that mattered, stopped seeing me as a partner worth respecting, and I was not willing to spend whatever years I had left quietly absorbing that belief while continuing to prop up a company on his behalf. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Carol that same evening, sitting at our own kitchen table, before I tell you what happened the following morning. Walter, she said, after I told her exactly what Gregory had said, word for word, you built this company before that boy could walk. I watched you do it. Whatever you decide to do about it, I want you to know I'm behind you completely, and I think you already know, deep down, exactly what you're going to do. The board called an emergency meeting the following morning, once word of the letter of intent reached the 3 minority shareholders and, shortly after, Gregory himself. I want to tell you about that meeting, because I think it captures the actual turning point of this entire story more clearly than almost anything else I could tell you. Gregory arrived pale, visibly shaken, a folder of financial projections under his arm that he never once opened during the entire meeting. Dad, he said, the moment the formalities were dispensed with, please tell me this isn't real. Meridian would restructure everything. They'd bring in their own executive team. I could lose my position entirely. I told him, plainly, that everything he just described was a genuine possibility, and that it was precisely the kind of possibility a controlling shareholder is entitled to consider when he no longer believes his current arrangement serves the company, or himself, well. One of our minority shareholders, a longtime operations manager named Ruth Alvarez who had been with the company since 1998, spoke up at that point, carefully, the way a person speaks when they've watched a situation building for longer than they've felt comfortable saying anything about. Walter, she said, I don't want to overstep, but I think everyone in this room has heard Gregory talk about this place like it's already fully his for a while now. Maybe this is the moment that finally gets addressed properly, one way or another. Dad, Gregory continued, his voice cracking on the word in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. I didn't mean it like that yesterday. I was frustrated. I've been under enormous pressure trying to modernize this place, and I said things I shouldn't have said, especially in front of Marcus and Ellen. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Please don't do this. I looked at my son for a long moment, in front of the 3 minority shareholders, all of whom had worked alongside both of us for years, and I said, Gregory, I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear it clearly, because it matters more than the apology itself. You told me to retire and disappear. You called me an embarrassment, in front of employees I hired before you'd even joined this company. I have given 4 decades of my life to building something you seem to believe you're entitled to simply because you carry my name. I am willing to reconsider the sale, but only if you understand, completely and permanently, that this company was never yours to inherit through disrespect. If we rebuild this partnership, it rebuilds on genuine mutual respect, starting today, or it doesn't rebuild at all. Gregory sat with that for a long moment, and I did not fill the silence, because I have learned, over the years, that some silences need to be sat inside fully before either party tries to speak past them. I want the partnership, he finally said. The real one. Not the version I've apparently been quietly acting like I already had. I withdrew the letter of intent with Meridian the following week, at real cost, both financially and in terms of the goodwill I'd have to rebuild with Philip and Diane for setting the process in motion and then reversing it. But I structured something new with Gregory in its place, formalized properly through Diane's office, a clearer governance framework requiring genuine consultation on major decisions, a public correction of how Gregory represented the ownership structure at industry events going forward, and a real, honest conversation, finally had directly rather than assumed, about what genuine succession would actually look like over the following decade. I want to tell you honestly that the months following that agreement were not a smooth, uninterrupted climb toward trust, however tidy that might sound in a shorter telling. There was a real test that spring, when a major client threatened to leave over a billing dispute, and Gregory, instead of quietly working around me the way the old version of him might have, called me directly, walked me through the situation, and asked for my read on the client's history before making his decision. We solved it together, in a single afternoon, the way we should have been solving problems together for years already. I want to tell you about a moment nearly a year later, because I think it captures how much genuinely shifted between us. We were at an industry conference together, and a vendor asked Gregory, casually, whether he owned the company outright now. Gregory did not hesitate. My father's still the majority owner, he said, and honestly, this company runs better because he's still in the room. I learn something from him every single week. If there is a lesson in this story, and I believe there is one, it is this. A father who builds something real does not owe an apology for refusing to be quietly written out of it, however inconvenient his continued presence might feel to someone eager to take full control. Respect and inheritance are not the same thing, and a son who confuses the two eventually has to learn the difference, one way or another. If any part of this story stayed with you tonight, tell me in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe if you'd like to stay close. There is more of this family's story worth telling. Thank you, truly, for staying with me all the way to the end. One final note before you go. The chapters in this telling carry fictionalized elements woven in to bring a human truth to life more clearly. If that isn't the kind of content you're looking for, no hard feelings at all. Choose what serves you, and take good care of yourself.